Hey everybody, it's me, Adam, and we're doing something a little different today. We are going to be streaming some painting for miniature war games. Oh, my light's off here. Let me turn that on. Probably. But I just got my backing for the Kickstarter for Relic Knights, which is a new miniature war game. And today we're going to be painting some of these Noh Berserker dudes. They're pretty cool. So, I'm trying to basically teach a little way to paint these guys pretty cheap. The camera's going to refocus a lot here. Hopefully it doesn't bug anyone too much. So as you can see, I've done a little prep work here. The big thing is, obviously they're primed. You always want to prime your models. Otherwise the paint won't stick. These ones are made out of they're like that plastic resin, kind of like the Privateer Press models are made out of, so it's not straight plastic. You can't use the polystyrene cement, unfortunately. So I primed them black, even though I'm painting red. I know I'm crazy, sorry, but I think it's actually a pretty good idea. So then, as I do with all my models, you can see here on Zenata, who we're not going to be painting right now, but I always just dry brush them with a light gray if I'm painting over black. And that does a couple things. That one, it allows you to see all the detail in the model. So, like, for example, this guy's got a lot of cool detail in his gun, and it really brings it out and lets you see it so you can know what you're painting. No pun intended there. And it also allows you to get a better coat on things. So, like, if you're painting red, it's really hard to paint red over black, but painting over the gray is a lot easier. So, and the other thing about this was I did the red on all of their skin. These guys are big old demon dudes. So I wanted to do that first because red is really hard to paint and it'll take a lot of coats. So this one took 3 coats. And just for reference, I used Corn Red from Games Workshop. This is a Citadel base coat. These things have a lot of extra pigment per ounce or whatever, so they're really good for getting base coats on stuff. But because I knew it would take 2 or 3 coats, and I ended up doing 3 just to be certain. I really wanted to get that done ahead of time, so you didn't have to literally watch paint dry on the stream. It's a good idea, right? So now I've got most of my red. So what we're gonna do now is to get this to build up and get some detail. Dry brush it. Now we're going to basically go up with at least 3 successive layers of red here. So this is Scarlet Red. Now I'm using the game color from Vallejo, and they were kind of cheeky when they made their paints, and they basically stole all of the Games Workshop paints, made them something very close to it. So this one's like Scarlet Red, and it's something very close to what the Games Workshop color was. And the name is very similar, so they basically are trying to get the exact same color but not have any sort of copyright problems. So I always use this is just a tile from Home Depot, just a white porcelain tile, and it helps a lot with I always like to put my paint on my palette and work from there. So now we're gonna take our red here. Now the biggest problem people have when they're dry brushing is they get impatient with it. So you can see how I had a ton of paint come off here, and I'm still wiping it, and still a lot of paint is coming off. Because if that much paint is coming off on your paper towel, whose edges are really not all that sharp, a ton of paint is going to come off on your model whose edges are pretty sharp. So what you really have to do is, if you want to build up a color, like this one, we do want to build up a lot of color. We want this to go basically everywhere but the cracks of the model. So, but in order to build it up, what a lot of people will do is go, I'll just leave more paint on my brush. And that will get more paint onto the model. But it'll get it to come off in a really nasty way that does not look nice. So the key is you have to be patient. You have to let the paint build up very slowly. And that really just going to require you to have a lot less paint on your brush and just go at it for a much longer period of time. And sometimes you won't even notice. And so that's where sort of good dry brushing comes. So now, you can see on this model, hopefully, he's got a lot of big muscles, And a lot of times you wouldn't think dry brushing is really great for that sort of thing. But dry brushing can get a bad name when people, like I said, when people do it wrong, basically. When they, if they aren't patient with it, they don't take the time to build it up properly, then yeah, it looks really like pixely almost. And it looks kind of gross. So that's why we are going to do it right. So you can see how, like, I'm taking a long time. I'm letting it really build up. And I think you can kind of see it on the stream here, on the video, if you're watching later. But it really builds up pretty well. So like, just like to compare the two. Sorry. Hopefully it will. So this one on the right here, my right, is without it, and this one is with it. You can really see how there's a little detail on there, but it's not super noticeable right away, and that's what you want. You want it to be, really like subtle. So we're going to keep going with our next one. I have 3 models here. I have 2 Noh Berserkers. The Noh Berserkers come in a unit of 2, so that's why I have 2 of them. That's the guy I just did with his little 1 weapon, this guy with his 2 axes. And I'm also doing a Noh Render, who has a ranged weapon. But yeah, so what I'll do a lot of times, just to give you guys an overview of how I'm doing this, to get quick, like, sort of tabletop quality models out there, is I'll do this technique of building up with the dry brushing, which again, when it's done well, can work out pretty well. But it does still have a little bit of that imprecision to it. So what I'll do a lot of times is, again, you build up sort of with, a base coat, and then sometimes 2 or 3, depending on how many layers you want. And then I'll hit it with a miniature, like a paint wash. And I long ago I learned to make my own paint washes to get exactly the color I wanted, and we'll see if we have to do that here. We could probably use one of the Built-in Games Workshop ones pretty easily, which are really good, but I also know how to make them sort of from scratch to get exactly sort of the color and the tone you want. So what that does is, when there is this little bit of, like, sort of, it looks like almost like pixely, there's some granularity to it. The wash will kind of tone that down and bring it out, and and kind of get rid of it for you. So another key point here when I'm talking about this dry brushing is, you'll notice that I'm getting this everywhere, right? This is not a precision instrument right now. But what I did is I'm starting with his skin. So the key here is, you hear this a lot with painting any models. This is not just with dry brushing, but you want to go for, like, sort of what they call an inside out method. So you want to paint the deepest parts of the model first. So as an example, like, these guys don't have a lot of clothes, there's just armor. But if you were thinking of a guy who's wearing like a shirt and a vest and a jacket, you would want to paint the shirt first, and then the vest, and then the jacket. And the reason for that is the shirt is the deepest in. So if you tried to paint the jacket first, then you go and paint the vest, you'd be trying to get inside the folds of that jacket, and you might get it on. When you're painting the vest, and you might get it on the jacket. Then you have to go back and retouch up the jacket. Then you're going to try to do the shirt, and you might get some on the vest, or you might get it on the jacket. So you got to go retouch those up. So what we're doing here is we're painting the skin, because that's the lowest point on the model in terms of depth. And I am getting red paint all over his armor, which is higher up, and that's okay because I haven't painted the armor yet. So what I'll do next is I'll go. And I'm going to do, like, the next set of armor. So, for example, he's got different armor plates here. So I'm going to be painting these interior armor parts different than these upper parts. So I'll paint these interior ones first because they're lower. And what'll happen there is I'll just be very careful. And because the red is so much lower, there's much less of a chance of me getting anything on it. And then I'll finally paint the most raised parts. So there he goes. He's got some nice red on him. His muscles are looking defined. And finally we'll go on to our Noh Render. But anyway, that's why we're starting with the skin, because it's the lowest point of the model. For other models, you might not start with the skin. It all just kind of depends on how easily it's going to be to slop over onto other parts of the model. And again, a lot of this is all about patience. Summing it up. Hey, what's up, Smell? Just lurking. Don't want to play tabletop games. Just want to see you're really good at this. I am. Yeah, I'm pretty good at teaching it, I think. So if anyone's watching this on YouTube later, so I hope to post it for help. We're doing this in the Twitch chat, so you can follow us and check us out. But I worked at a Games Workshop store for a long time, and part of my job was to teach anyone who came in how to paint models. And not everyone's really good at that because it takes a lot of patience. And so I learned some tips and tricks, basically like how to make this dry brushing look good when this is normally considered to be kind of a junky technique. Because sometimes it was my job to paint a whole army of 200 guys in a day, right? 200 models. And so you had to, like, I literally once had to paint an army of, you guys on there might not know who this is, but for Games Workshop for 40K, the Relic Knights, and I had to paint, they literally told me, like, here's 50 guys, we have to paint these have to be painted in 2 hours. Now luckily they're all like silver armor dudes, so like we were able to get through it really quick. And bust them out because it was for like a convention that was happening that day. But like sometimes that's what you have to be able to do. And sometimes we'd have a new army would come out and we'd want to have it in the store. You want to have it in the store for people to play with and try out, but you also didn't want to have it around for too long, people waiting. So you'd have to get this army done out the door in a day, and that was kind of like the fun. It was kind of one of the fun things. But yeah, teaching how to do some of this is different. So hopefully there won't be too much of this on the stream, but I have had to. Obviously, I'm explaining, and then I have to do a bunch of it. So now my brush is pretty dry here. I don't want to wet it and clean it because I'm dry brushing. If I get it too wet, it won't come off. But luckily, there's not much left on the brush. So now I'm basically going to go up one shade lighter. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is the one we used before, and this is the one we're using now. And the paint isn't mixed on the edges there, so it's going to look a little. It's actually going to look a little darker, but I don't think it is. Or is it? Let me. I'm a little concerned this might be too dark. We're gonna try it out, but so again, we're doing the same thing. We're get a little paint on the brush, wipe it off. Again, you have to make sure it is all coming off. So this is lighter. So one of the tricks when you're dry brushing and you're wiping it off like this is if there's basically no paint coming off anymore, almost none. At that point, there is actually still paint on your brush. It's just that the hard edges of the paper towel's edges aren't very hard. They're very soft, actually, because it's made of paper. So they're not gonna scrape, which is what sounds like what's happening. They're not gonna scrape the paint off of the brush. So because they're not doing, but the edges on your model are very hard, right? Because they're hard plastic or metal or resin or whatever they are. So even though it looks like no paint is coming off on the brush, paint will still come off on your models. So you don't have to like that. That's actually how you know that you've wiped enough paint out of the brush. Like it was when nothing more is coming off on your paper towel. This is a little lighter in practice. It's weird because when it's pulled up, it looks darker, but when I spread it out, it is actually lighter. It's kind of weird. So this is Gory Red, which if you're looking at the Games Workshop paints, it is Red Gore. That's how they kind of cheated and used the same names. And then I think in the Games Workshop is since these were all named, they've changed all their paint color names. So there's a conversion chart out there. So if you want to use the same colors I'm doing, you can either use the Vallejo game colors, or you can go get the Games Workshop equivalents. Either one works. They're both good paints. I honestly, it's kind of lame, but the reason I went full all in with Vallejo is because I like the dropper bottles. So like even when I was working at Games Workshop and ever since then, I would use the tile to put paints in because a couple of reasons. One, if you leave the paint jar open, the paints dry out. Two, this like helps you control how much you're using, and it's kind of just it works out pretty well. But the dropper bottles are just really nice because you just put exactly how much you need out there, mix it up, do whatever you need to. Yeah. So again, this is the boring part. You can see I'm building up the color here, but that's how we're gonna make it look good and make it easy. So I'm all about, like, I want to take the time to make good. So if you really want it fast, I still do this, but I'll use more colors, or I'll make the process faster. For example, for War Machine, I was painting some of my Gatormen, what are they called, the Blindwater Congregation, and they're all alligators, right? So there's lots of green. So I basically, instead of building up more layers of color, I just used kind of like two. Like I painted dark green, and then I did a light green, and then I did a super light green, just touch up to go, and it looks much less complete, but it went really fast. So basically, you just build up fewer colors, like fewer layers of color. So you can see these guys now. They're starting to get some detail in there. I'm trying to get the camera to focus. Maybe if I do it here. Yeah, I don't know. This thing doesn't seem to want to focus very well. Sorry about that all. But now we're going to go on to there's another color. So basically, again, we're just totally building up with layers of red. So this is our third layer red. This is bloody red, or as it's known in Games Workshop circles, blood red. So now this is just on the colors I have. This is like a step up. This is much lighter than the other ones. So I'm going to be a little concerned. I might actually want to kind of do a 50-50 red, gory red, bloody red. So that's actually what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to take half and half, equal amounts, and build up. Because again, I want this to be more gradual if I can help it, which I can by mixing. And this doesn't matter like what you're doing. So for example, I'm painting these guys red because they're kind of, they're big scary demons. It makes a lot of sense to me to make them red. But let's say you wanted to do them in a totally different color. You want them to be green. You want them to be purple. You want them to be yellow's a bad example, but blue, dark blue, whatever it is. You can follow this same technique, and that is you paint it solid with a base color, a dark color. That's going to be your base, and you build it up through layers, adding slightly lighter each time, and then we're going to put a wash on it at the end to bring the colors together. So again, I'm slightly concerned that this red might be too light, so hopefully it's not going to be too bad. And again, we're making sure we have no paint on the brush. See, even a little still coming off here. That means I had too much. And we're going up through a bunch of layers here. So again, I started with my base, my corn red, and we've gone through 3 layers. This is our 3rd layer now. And again, my paints are they've been sitting in the closet for a while, so they may not have mixed entirely properly. So I'm concerned that my scab red, what's it actually called? Scarlet red. Yeah, scarlet red's real color is scab red. Vallejo, I think, has a color match chart somewhere, so if I'm saying these Vallejo colors, you should be able to go look them up. Unfortunately, that'll be like a three-step process, because you'll look up the Vallejo color and it'll give you the old Games Workshop color, and you'll take that to the Games Workshop color conversion chart for their new colors and find out what that is. But you'll be able to find it if I don't tell you right. So I'm building up. But anyway, my Scab Red and my Red Gore those are the Games Workshop names. They were very similar in tone, probably just because some of it settled and they didn't quite mix properly. So maybe that doesn't count as an extra layer. But the idea is to slowly build it up and it'll look good. So now you'll notice that, again, I started off with no paint on my brush, right? Like wiping it all off already. So how am I getting less and less consecutively on each layer? And the key to that is how much I do it. So if you just dry brush once real quick across the model, it'll pick up the sharpest corners. But then as you continue to do it, it'll get more and more on the sharp corners, but it'll also start to gradually get it in the flat areas. And this is where dry brushing kind of gets its bad name and where it looks bad, right? Is if you leave too much on the brush, then if you leave too much on the brush, then it gets all over the flat areas in like a streaky pattern or a blotchy pattern. And that's when it starts to look like you didn't try or you weren't doing very much, because you were not being patient with it. So what then happens is you end up with this you end up with these blotches and streaks and stuff on your model in the flat areas, and that's where it's really obvious, and it starts to look bad, and people go, "Oh, that's kind of, it's kind of gross. That guy didn't try very hard." So that's where it starts to look bad. And so when I'm doing this, what you have to do now is you still have very little paint on your brush, but the amount of time you spend brushing it and how hard you press your brush into it when you do it is going to be less. So I'm only doing it just a little flick in a couple directions. Again, there's no real grain to the muscles and the face and stuff here. So a lot of times when you're dry brushing, like if you're doing fur and the fur has a pattern, you want to go against the grain. But again, this doesn't really have a grain, so you're kind of just going back and forth in all directions. If you really want to get sort of like a light sourcing effect, you go top down on the model, because the light, theoretically, there's a sun and it's coming down, and there's more light on that top part of him. But again, so the two ways that you're doing less later on is amount of pressure with the brush and the amount of time that you are actually brushing. So, again, this is very boring to watch, just this part, so I apologize if it's too bad. But you're actually getting to see me do the whole thing here. I thought that was kind of important to be able to see it, and not just have a summary and say, well, and then you dry brush it, and now it looks like this, voila. You can see literally how much time I'm doing on each of these layers. And we're on the blood red now, in case anyone, if I didn't mention that. That's the second model for blood red. And I'll go on to the third. So now we're getting onto the trickiest portion of red, which is how do you make it lighter than the lightest red you've already got, which is always really difficult, because if you mix in a white or even a gray, it starts to look pink, and most of the time you don't really want pink. That's not what you're going for. So you can go orange, but then it looks orange, and if you use yellow, it gets you into that orange tone as well. If you want it just sort of like a popping red, so what I will do, and excuse me if you're going to find it in my paint jar, is you want like a light brown or like a bone color or something like that, or like a khaki color. I'm actually going to use this, it's called Dead Flesh for Vallejo, but it's called Rotting Flesh for Games Workshop. And so if you can see it here, it's this color. It's kind of like a putrid green gray. And so what this will do is this, it'll lighten it, but it lightens it so it's not a bright color. It's still light, but it'll allow you to lighten it in a different way. So like I would choose either a light brown or a khaki. So I'm just trying to find an appropriate color here. So like if you did a khaki, this would work as well. This khaki color. Whoop. Oh, sorry. I forgot my camera's flipped. So you can see these are actually pretty similar in tone. But this just give you a different flavor. So we're gonna mix again. We're doing some mixing now. We're gonna mix in our red with our blood red with our rotting flesh, and it still looks a little pink. I don't want to do too much. I don't want to make it too light so it's too pink. But again, this will be just the. You can definitely sense the putrid flesh vibe from it. Says the chat. Yes, that is correct. It is gross, and I use it for zombies a lot. So you can see what I'm doing with my palette here. I'm using it to mix. I'm using it to wipe off excess paint. And when I get into more like actual hand brushing, I'll use it to mix water in as well. And again, remember, we got to get all this paint out. Look how much paint I have on there since I mixed that together. Got to get it all off. All right, now it's starting to come off. It's looking good. Also, I'm using a dry brush for this, and this is actually one of the Games Workshop dry brushes. People don't necessarily like to pay for these because they are expensive. The Games Workshop ones are super expensive. And you can use old... Oh, sorry, let me make sure everyone can see this. You can use old paint brushes, but when you're dry brushing, the key to a good dry brush is that the bristles are all the same length. So I'll show you my brush here in a second for that. But that's the key to a good dry brush. And to make it look good is that the bristles are all the same length. So hopefully you can see this, but he's got a lot of definition to his face now. I'm just trying to get it to focus, guys, sorry. So that gave a lot of definition to his face. Let me... Hopefully this camera will be better. Boop. But you can see it gets a little more definition in his face there. And you can actually see all the contours and everything. Boop. So that's what we're going for. And again, if you... so this dry brush is actually very old. I'm almost ashamed to show it. But for example, this is like a nice small dry brush I have. You notice all the bristles sort of just chop off at the same length. It's hard to see, but it's not like it doesn't come to a point like a typical paintbrush will, and that'll allow you to, when it goes through, it'll hit everything equally, and some of them won't get into the crevices and things. And that's kind of actually what you wanted to avoid. You only want it to brush up against the high points and hit those. So that's the key. So if you do have an old brush that you're trying to turn into a dry brush, the best thing you can do is to just take some scissors and chop off all the bristles at the length of like the shortest bristle, and that will allow you to have equal length bristles and have a sweet dry brush. So now I'll say this now, hopefully I won't get called out on it. But these models do look very light. They do look very pink and they look very bright. But that's okay, because remember I said that we're going to put an ink wash over this. And if people aren't familiar with this, dipping, ink washing, min waxing, these are all basically the same thing. But what it does is it's a very like viscous, thin paint that has a high surface tension. And what it'll do is it gets into the cracks of the model and darkens them up. So you can see all these guys. Again, they're very bright. They're very pink. Different things have different light. I should get an overhead light for this next time I do it. Sorry if this is hard to see, guys, but yeah, I'll get one of my spotlights to throw on here. So that's actually it for red. I think we're gonna call that it. So what the ink wash does is it gets into the cracks and the crevices and makes them darker. And if you have your ink wash mixed correctly, what it'll also do is it'll put a gradual look to it. So what it'll do is the darkest crevices will be the darkest, and then it'll slowly get lighter from them, or less dark out from there. And this works very similar to a floor stain. So if you have a piece of wood that's all sanded down, you put a floor stain on it, the floor stain gets in there and seeps into all the cracks and darkens them up and allows you to see all the wood grains. The exact same thing, but you do it on your model. And it's pretty cool. So I am trying to clean my brush off as well as possible. So I'm gonna do the ink wash on this. A lot of times what I'll do when I'm painting models like these is I'll do all of the layers individually, and then I'll put the ink washes back over at the end, and sometimes it helps kind of clean up stuff at the fact. But I'm going to do the ink wash now, so hopefully we can see it by the time we're done with the video. So I have to find my red ink wash. Alright. So again, I have... Games Workshop keeps changing their paint color names. So I have paints from like 3 nations of Games Workshop paint names. So I very much apologize if you're looking for something very specific, or if I'm telling you something specific and you can't find it. Alright, I'm getting close to finding everything I need. Sorry for all the banging. I'm missing one that I'm looking for. So I'm going to substitute, and hopefully you guys won't be too upset about that. So, I got 3 washes here. You can you can use less if you want. But the 3 I have, this one is Baal Red, B-A-A-L. And then Nuln Oil. This is the current one. It's like a black. And then right now this Gray Tone Sepia. The one I want is actually Devlin Mud. I just don't have it with me here. I could make one, but make a wash up, but we're not gonna do that right now. So, why do I need 3 colors of wash? I hear you cry. Well, there's a couple reasons for that. So I want to do red, right? I'm doing red skin. I want it to pop. I want it to be red. So we're using a red wash. But I also want it to get dark. I want it to be a darker wash. I want it to get in the cracks a little better. And so for that, I need to darken it up. So Nuln Oil is a black wash. But if you want anything to look, doing just a black wash on anything almost always doesn't look right. Because things aren't black and white. They're shades of gray. You never find anything that's perfectly, clean. And so you want to throw a little brown in there just to change it up. I like the Devlin Mud better, but the Gray Tone Sepia will work in this case. So I'm going to just add a tiny little bit more Nuln Oil than I would, and a little bit less of the Gray Tone Sepia, because the Devlin Mud's a little darker. Now these washes are mixed up really well, so I'm going to water them down a little bit, but I don't need to add anything else to make the surface tension a little higher. So I do have an article on the website that talks about how to make washes in like a written format. It's not always the best way to see it, and I'll do a video about it hopefully soon, about how to make washes and how to get them to look exactly how you want. But that day is not today. So now I'm using the tile for some other stuff. So I'm getting the red on here, and this red is actually pretty dark, so I don't need to darken it up too much. Now, if you want your demon's flesh to really pop and look like it's not, like otherworldly, then maybe don't add the brown in. And again, how much black you add is sort of a matter of how dark you want it and how recessed you want the thing to look. So there's a little bit of experimentation with all of this. So I'm going to put some just drops of water here on my tile to use as a reservoir, essentially. Boop-a-doop-a-doop. And so let's lighten that up a little bit. So I'm looking at it. That color looks pretty good. And you can kind of pull a little bit out to see how well it pools. So I'm going to start with the Render, actually, because he's got smaller areas of flesh I can sort of test on. And so literally you kind of dab this on. You want it to be on there pretty thick, because the idea is that it pools in the recesses and makes for some and does all the sort of the detail work for you. So to make that happen, you have to put more on there than you think, because it's going to do its own thing and it's going to pool properly. So as I'm looking at the face, I'm kind of seeing how it's pooling. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to do the arms as well. It looks pretty good, but these crevices really aren't looking super dark. Like the very edge crevices aren't looking as dark as I want them. They're just kind of looking a little bit darker. So that means I don't have enough black in my mixture, because the black is gonna affect the overall tone of everything I put on there, but it's also going to affect the place you're going to be able to tell is in the crevices. So I'm going to put a little more on here. And that's So I look in the very crevices, like where his arm meets another part, not where it's just like a muscle in his arm, and it's much darker than it was before. So luckily this isn't dry. I can kind of just go over it with some more. Again, you want to leave a good amount pooling on there, because as it recedes, it's going to actually pull away from where it was, and sort of change the way it looks. So you want to actually dollop a good amount on there. And I'll do a video on ink washes specifically. And again, you're going to want to just get it over the whole area. And at this point, I don't care if I'm slopping it on to other areas that we haven't painted yet. As we go in and we do more, as we go on to the next section, start doing his weapons and some of his armor, I'll care a lot more, right? Because I don't want to mess it up. And that's one of the reasons I talked about how I would do all the dry brushing first and then go on and do the rest of it. So now this guy has a lot more skin to him and a lot more crevices to get it into. So I got to make sure I'm coating it properly and it's recessing properly. So the other thing about this is, while I said you do want to put a lot on there, you also want to be very diligent. So you want to throw it on there. Make sure it's coating properly, because if you miss any parts, they're gonna stand out a lot. But at the same time, you don't want it to pool too much, because you can't always tell with a model where its pooling points are going to be. You can guess and you can get a pretty good idea, but sometimes just the way a model is sculpted, you'll get a lot of stuff pooling in one big area, and then it'll actually stay there basically permanently, and then form this big mucky sludge that not even again, like that's like, it like hardens and it just gets really bad. So you want to, I'm going to put too much black in there. So I'm going to get some more water. Again, so I have to mix up a second batch. Now, I messed up a little bit because I didn't mix up enough to do all the models. I basically only did enough to do 1.5. And it would have been better if I could have made sure to get the right amount in the first mixture. But, just got to live and learn and practice. So, that looks about the same. And again, this is how I paint a lot. So, like, I have kind of two painting modes. Like I said, with back from my Games Workshop store days. Sometimes we just needed an army to be, to be in use for, big games and whatever else we were doing. And sometimes we wanted to like really showcase how cool a new model was, in which case we needed to paint it really nicely, or we wanted to have one big centerpiece for the army. So I developed two modes of painting. One is, let's paint this model as nice as we can possibly make it, get really detailed. There's little to no dry brushing when I'm in that mode. I still use ink washers for that, because it's a really good way to, you can still paint with them like it was a normal paint, but to get a nice shade, and you can use science as your ally, basically. And so that's like nice painting mode. And then there's get the army out the door mode, which is, divide the model into as few different areas as possible, and basically different types of things you have on it as possible, and then figure out how do I get those as quickly as close as possible, and then depending on what they would do. So I'm not painting these guys in that full mode, because this is what I would do if they were in that full mode. I notice he's got a bunch of different kinds of armor. And so what you want to do when you're painting anything is you want to identify, well, what's this model got on him that I'm painting? And so this guy, basically, they've got a bunch of skin, which I'm choosing to paint red here, which is what we're currently working on. He's got a couple different kinds of armor. They got armor plate, different types of armor plates. There's a couple different types. They've got their weapons. He's got sort of like teeth, and he's got some jewelry, like on his ears and his mouth. They've got some cloth, and then some of these guys have Like this guy's got like shoes, and this guy's got like pants on as well. So I take all those, and so if I was trying to do it as fast as possible, this is what I would do. I would say, well, skin's red, that's fine. Armor, I'm going to make it, some of it gold, some of it brown, which is what I'm actually going to do, but I would cheat a little bit. Because what I'm doing here is the red gets its own wash. It gets a nice red with some black in it wash. That's custom mixed for the skin. But if I was doing it as fast as possible, I wouldn't do that. I would go, some armor's gold, some armor's silver, and armor and weapons are silver. Teeth are a bone color. Pants and any other cloth is going to be like either a dark black or brown. And then I would wash the whole model with a black and brown mixture. Because now when you're doing red, you can do the red here. And I chose to do that because I wanted the skin to pop a little bit. Because they're supposed to be like otherworldly demons, right? At least that's my thought. And so I wanted to pop a little bit, so I wanted to give it some actual... Oh, did I forget to do this guy's feet? I did. I think I caught that now. So I wanted the red to pop a little bit. But if you're doing red, another good way to do it, like brown actually works really well in red, because when you take red down to its roots in paint terms, it looks brownish. So like if you wanted to like have a shade of your red that's really dark, I would actually use a brown over a black, like a dark brown. So you can wash the red area with a brown wash, and then I'm like, well, gold also looks like, if you're going to do gold washed, that's also brown, and if you wash silver, then it looks just dirty silver when you put the brown over it. Dark brown or black pants, they look fine with a brown wash, and the white like bone for the teeth and everything, that will also look good with a wash. So that's what I would do if I was trying to paint this as quickly as possible. Is I would give only one color of wash. It would be this brown and black wash over the whole thing. And so that's how, if you want to do your Noh very quickly, again, dry brush, you're gonna do their skin red just like I'm doing here, but don't wash it with this color. And then we're gonna do the armor also, like I'll show you. But you just do it all at once with one big brown wash, and that's what a dip basically is. So dipping happened a long time ago with like Minwax. Minwax is literally floor stain. It's a brand of floor stain, and so if you wanted to get something done quickly, you wanted some Tomb Kings or some Skeletons or Necrons or Chaos Warriors or whatever they were, you just paint them with their base colors and then dip them in wax and then flick the stuff off and let it dry, and it would work. It would look really good, per the amount of effort you put in, obviously. And so Army Builder, which a company has basically productized that. Oh, see you, Smell. My viewers leaving. But you guys can be viewers next time if you're watching this later. Before you go, I'll show you what this kind of looks like. It's still drying, but you can see here his skin. And so that wash is getting into all the nooks and crannies. It's getting into his muscles. It's getting into his facial features, and it makes him... Man, I wish this thing would focus a little better. And so you can see his skin and how it's getting in all the muscle cracks. And even though we didn't do a lot of work, we just did quick dry brushing and an ink wash, we're starting to get some real good definition on all his muscles and everything. Yeah. So that's basically the skin. This is going to take a little while to dry 100%. But the skin is basically done now. And again, I took my existing washes, I added extra water to them, and what that does is it'll increase the surface tension a little bit, and you can also add like PVA, a little bit of PVA glue or matte medium, which maybe I should have done. And what that does is it makes it pool more, which will give you more definition between your painted areas and your crevices. And so, looking at these in retrospect, and sometimes on models you have to see a little bit what they look like after you do it. I would have added a little matte medium or a little PVA glue to that mixture to give it a little more surface tension to give them more definition. But what you gonna do? So, that's that. So let me. I'm gonna quick pull up here and maybe show you guys. Actually, I'm gonna go grab my book, my Relic Knights book here. So we want to look at how some of these models were painted by the studio scheme, just to get an idea of where all the different areas are. So again, when I was talking about how we look at the model and figure out what the different areas on the model are in terms of what we're going to paint what, looking at the studio models helps a little bit. So I'm going to do this a little differently. So these are some of the guys we're painting, right? And you notice their armor in the middle of these plates is red. And so it's like silver with red plates in the middle. I'm going to do this a little differently. I want it to be silver and gold, because I think that'll look really good together, especially with the red skin. I'm also going to do the hair white. All the teeth and everything are going to be kind of a bone color. But I'm going to do silver armor, mainly silver armor with some gold like inlays and things. I think that'll look really cool. So I'm looking at this just sort of for reference. But anywhere you see red on here in the armor, I'm basically going to do it as gold, I think. And then in the silver, I'm basically going to do silver, and then some of them are going to change up. Like this guy's like belly plate, that's silver. It's going to look better gold, I think. So I'm not going to get through too terribly much because I don't want to do too much painting with the while this ink is still wet, and so this will actually be better to do on a separate session. But I'll link it all together here in the video. So if you're watching later, much later, you'll see that. But we'll get started a little bit. So now, colors. So we're going to start with a gold because, again, if I look at this, his armor, the inlaid parts that we're going to do as gold, that's the next most, like the innermost part. So I want to do that next. And I really want to build this up to it. I want there to be a lot of contrast here. So I'm using Vallejo's Tinny Tin, which is tin bits, is the color that Games Workshop. It's sort of like it's like a dark, ugly brass tin color. I don't know if it's supposed to be like dirtier tin or just darker, but that's what we got. So we're gonna put some. Now we're gonna be painting some paint on here, some base coats and stuff. So what I'm gonna do is I put a little bit of the paint on the palette. Oh, so that just sprayed all over because the thing was plugged. So let me do a little bit of damage control here. Yes, it did get on my computer a little bit. So let's fix that. Oh no. Maybe we'll edit this part out, right? Alright, be right back, folks. Alright, sorry about that, guys. Anyway, so we're talking about this. So we're going to be painting this dark brassy tin, and with gold is always a little weird, so we're basically going to build that up through we're then going to do a brass color. So it's going to be like this dark tin, and then a brass, and then a gold. And that's kind of how I always do my golds. Again, if you look on the website, I'm going to say this a lot because I've done a lot of this kind of stuff on the website. I'll put some links in the file notes here. But I have like a Bane Knight guide there that does the same thing. And all right, hopefully that didn't mess up anything too much, including your computer. But again, I have my Bane Knight guide where I do this a lot. I do the silver and the gold for the Bane Knights. Very similar. But I didn't waste too much of My tin bits. So again, this is where you have to, and this is sort of, you know, your prerogative. What do I want to be what color? And so I already said that the interior of this metal armor is going to be gold. So I'll hit that first. So these armor plates on the either edge of it are going to be silver. So I will leave them for now. You can actually base coat. You can do your base of silver with this. Actually, it looks pretty good. If you want it to be real dark, I don't want it to quite be that dark. But it's cool. And there's some armor plates in there that are going to be a pain to get to, but it's okay. And again, this is where I have to start being careful, right? I can't get this on anywhere that we've done red already. Especially when it's a little wet. Like if I actually get this into the ink, it will, because the ink is still a little wet, it'll sort of like infuse in there, and it'll just be super bad. But anyway, yeah, so I guess I can talk a little bit about Relic Knights while I'm doing this boring part here. It's one of those Kickstarters that was kind of like permeated everywhere, right? Because that's sort of what's been happening with Kickstarters over the last couple of years, is it'll travel by word of mouth. So he's got this whole like belt thing. I'm gonna do these interior parts, I think, as gold. Part of me is tempted to just do this all as gold right now and then redo it as silver afterward, but I'm not sure how that'll end up. So let's do this interior part here. And he's got this. I gotta get the interior part of this and do the rest of it silver. So yeah, so there's a lot of Relic Knights was going around, sounded pretty popular. And it's sort of, you know, I don't want to say, like, saying it's anime themed is kind of strange, but sort of like generally like anime, J-pop kind of ideas. And there's good and there's bad to that. So the good is that, you know, the art style is kind of fun and poppy and cool. And the bad to me is there's a lot of, what I'll say, fan service. There's a lot of like half-naked girls for no reason, you know, and unrealistic. I mean, and even Zenaida here is an example of that. She's a demon, but she's just, you know, half naked with strategically placed floating pieces of cloth, right? And that's like, not that that's a problem, but that's really kind of not why I'm playing a miniature war game, right? Like, I don't like, there's websites you could look at it for this stuff, and like some of them are fine, you know. That's gonna take place. That's in almost all games, but there's a lot of it in this game. So I'm trying to get past that. I got the Noh and the Black Diamond because sort of in general they're the ones who have the least amount of that going on. And I also got the Cersei Speed Circuit. For them, it was mainly because of the rules. They seem like they're the very fast, crazy, like super fast, super speedy, super like agility, I guess is the word I'm looking for, like based faction, and that always appeals to me. So for this guy, I already mentioned he's got this like belt buckle with a face on it. I think this will look really good, all mostly gold. And he's got a head plates and it's got a surrounding. So I'm actually just going to do this as almost all this is gold. And I can always do it as gold and then kind of go back and fix it up later if I feel like it. This whole loincloth, you can also be gold. And again, this you can kind of choose whatever you want for this part. It's really up to your style. And if you don't really have an opinion, you know, going similar to the the studio scheme is always a good way to do that. So this I'm actually not sure what I would do for the studio scheme, because I would want this is sort of red armored, right? But they also have red skin, so like to me that's kind of weird in that it keeps your colors like very focused, because you're not bringing in new colors. You're not bringing in a bunch of blue and orange and red and green anymore. But it also, like, it's kind of confusing. You're like, wait a minute, is that their skin? Is their skin built into their armor? So you have to do it somewhat differently. So maybe I would use like a grayer, maybe start it darker and then add, build it up with gray just to make it a little different. So he's got what looks like leather straps going on through here. So I'm going to do his pants as sort of a khaki cloth. So I'm just going to make those as the khaki as well. So on the back here, he's got this sort of tail scabbard. Interior, again, for most of these, I'm basically like, when I see that the armor has two sections, one sort of wrapped around the other, the interior part's going to be gold and the exterior part is going to be silver. That way it's easy for me, and it kind of, each of the different parts of armor looks the same, and they'll kind of have the same feel to them, and so it won't look like sort of visually disjointed when you're looking at him. So again, like I said, if I were doing this to be painted super speedily, maybe I would just do all of this silver too. If you wanted a little extra definition, you could still do this gold and silver bit. But maybe you make it all silver or all gold. Red and gold always looks really good together, so you can't really go wrong with it. So, like, maybe that's another way to speed it up. You kind of just think of these things. So, yeah, when I get my gators for hordes, the way I cheated was I'm like, well, a lot of times, for an alligator, you would have a lighter color, like, underbelly. And I was like, no, ain't nobody got time for that. And so I basically just made all of it green. And they basically only had, like, 3 colors. It was, like, green and wood and bone and metal. And a lot of those are very little. There's very few of each of them. So on his knee pads here, he's got a little bit of inset. So I'm gonna do that gold as well. You can kind of follow my rule. So then on his club here, he's got he's got an little end cap. I'll make that gold, and then he's got these. So this club actually looks probably like it's stone, so I'm gonna have to. This is gonna be another color I'm gonna have to add into this whole process. But I'm gonna make the cap gold here because my no demons are very fancy, lots of gold. And a lot of these times, again, I'll make these spikes silver. So I'm being very careful because I'm doing this all at once. If I were doing a whole army at once, I would be able to give all this stuff time to dry before I even got back to it with like putting on the next color. But because I'm only doing 3 models now, the ink still isn't 100% dry on all these, so I'm being very careful not to touch anything where I might get some of my paint into the ink. So this one I'm not terribly sure what I'm going to do gold. So it's got this like lion demon head on the end of the gun, so I'm actually going to paint that whole thing gold, like it's an ornament. That seems like a good idea to me. So this is where I'm being very careful because I'm getting close to his hand, which is going to have some of that ink in it. So what might happen is, I don't know if you've ever just dropped a piece of like food coloring or whatever into water. It doesn't just stay at the top, right? It sort of diffuses. You still got a pool of that ink on the model, and I get just a little bit of this brass into it. It's gonna just diffuse and work its way up the up the arm, which is not what I want. This handle, you can also be gold. Why not? And again, I'm just going through and saying, oh, I'm going to make this part gold, this part gold. You want to have sort of a little bit of contrast, right? Like, you don't want all the silver to be next to each other. You want the gold to break the silver up and vice versa. So you kind of just throw them around. So, those canisters should be silver, but maybe this thing that's holding them in, you could be gold. So if you're, and these techniques can be used for a lot of stuff you're doing. So this is almost exactly the same color scheme I have on my Scorn for Hordes, and you can use the exact same thing on your those shoulder pads got like some decoration on it. I'll do this gold as well. You can use this for your Khador, for War Machine. You can use this for Blood Angels, for Warhammer 40,000. You can use this for Khorne Demons and Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer 40,000. basically anything where you are, it's like red and gold is a look you're going for. You can use this exact same technique to make it happen. They're very similar. And again, the dry brushing and the ink washing, it'll actually work pretty well on armor too. But again, since armor plates are very solid, you have to make sure that you are doing the careful dry brushing on it. Otherwise, those big flat areas will get a bunch of schmutz on them, and again, the dry brushing won't look great. So he's got goggles on, which I'm going to make silver. These back power generator things, I think those are going to have to be silver too. This guy doesn't actually have as much gold on him as I would have thought. So I'm going to get this back panel here. But this guy doesn't have as much gold on him, other than much on his weapon. So on his weapon here, he's also got sort of like a top part. So this whole part, though, I don't want it to all be gold. So that's going to be silver, and just this one part will be gold. So now I'm going to go back into my two Berserkers here, and I am going to, because they have a bunch of facial jewelry on them. So like this one has earrings. I want that to be gold, but I don't want it to get into the other stuff I'm doing. So this is where I'm going to have to be very careful. So I don't know if you can see this on the camera very well, but you notice I'm bracing my two hands together. And what that does is it allows me to paint even if my hands are shaking a little bit. So what I do is I'm going to brace my two hands together like this. And if one of my hands shakes, the other one also shakes a little bit. And that way, you know what, there's a weapon here, like on the base, let's put a little bit of gold, and the hilt, and the handle of the hilt here. And that basically means if one of my hands shakes, my other hand's going to shake with it, and the brush and the model are both being held by the two of them, so everything kind of shakes. So it basically it's like sort of like a shock absorber. And I have both my elbows on the table, so like the triangle made between my elbows and my hands being put together, it kind of absorbs any shock that I might get while painting. My hands are shaking, or I bump the table, or whatever. And so that allows me to not worry about it, basically. All right, this guy's got his little ear studs as well. To make sure I got a nice point on my brush. And again, I really wanted to make sure that I waited until the ink wash on the skin was dry. And then I'm going to do one last once over of the model just to make sure I've gotten everything in a consistent manner. I want to make sure that I don't miss any spots now, because it's always a pain to have to go back and hit a spot again later if you're already working on it. So, just as a recap, we divided the models up into all the different zones we wanted to paint them in. Basically identified every different nook and cranny and every piece of the model as different things we wanted to paint. And then we assign a color we want those to be to each one. This is known as block coloring, if you've ever heard that phrase before. And it's very important to do sort of before you start painting, just so you know what you're doing and it's not a surprise. And you're not... And then if you have two things that are going to be the same color, you want to do them similarly so you don't have to go back and redo it, essentially. So on these models, since I want my Berserkers to look like my renders, and I want Kasaro Toe to look like them too, I'm going to use a very similar color palette on all of them. And so what the different colors are we have their skin, which is going to be this red we've built up. They have two different colors of armor. They're going to have some gold and some silver. And it's basically kind of like the interior decorative panels of all the armor is going to be gold, and all the big armor plates and weapons are going to be silver. We have cloth, which is like their pants and like shoe straps and leather straps and stuff. And that's going to be like a khaki. We have their teeth and horns, which are going to be a bone color. Makes sense. We have their hair, which is going to be a white. And this guy has a club, which is going to be a stone color. And that's it. So basically, we figure out what those are. We go through each one at a time. So the skin, we base coated it with a dark corn red from Games Workshop. We dry brushed it up with successive layers of reds, and you're being very careful, very light, all the way up to blood red mixed with a little bit of rotting flesh. I like my brushes. You shouldn't, but it's the thing I do, and I can't. It's an old habit. So, and then we ink washed it with a ball red mixed with some Nuln oil, and in this case, gray tone sepia. But what we prefer to have been Devlin mud. And that gave us our nice look here. And now we started base coating the gold armor with tin bits. And we're going to start dry brushing that up in our next session. So I'm going to try to get you guys a nice view of some of the work we've done here. So bear with me while I change my camera angle. I figure maybe if I hold it up against this white wall, the camera will focus properly. Oh, right. It's upside down. Again, so we've gotten a bunch of definition on all his skin and all his muscle. It's not like the greatest look, and we can always go in and do some highlights and touch it up there, just like to give it some sharp highlights. But it was quick, and it gives a lot of definition real quickly, which is kind of what we're going for. Again, I'm painting these in sort of what I called my middle tier of painting techniques. So I'm actually trying to figure out if I have a better lighting source I can do this with. And that's about all I got right now. So let me unflip this. So again, here's our other guy. Focus. He's got a lot of nice armor. I like the skin's looking pretty detailed. It's like focusing on my hand and not the model. It's very weird. And our render here, who has much less skin to him. I have to figure out a better way to do this, since this focus not so good. But that's what we've gotten so far. So the next time what we'll do is we'll build up that gold again, and we're going to wash that, and we'll probably start on the silver and start on that. And so what I might be doing is Zenaida and Spite here are our questing knight and her cipher. We're working on them alternatively, just so that we can switch it off, because I was having to wait a little bit while some of the stuff dried. And if I'm doing the gold and the silver right next to each other, they're very likely to sort of spill into each other, and we don't want that. So this will give me an alternative on stuff to work on and look at. So again, there's some of our Noh. We're getting their skin nice and shaded and detailed, and that's what you got to do. You got to be a little patient. Build up, look nice, and this will also look better. So like, it doesn't look super bright right now because it's set up against like a bunch of black and gray and dark colors. But once we get that all painted in, and then basically get the skin framed in, and we pick out some of the eyes and the hair to make it pop, it will look pretty cool. So that's part one of our Noh painting. I guess we'll call it a tutorial. It's a little long, but I figured it would be good for everyone to see the entire thing, and we can take some screen grabs and stuff of it later. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time.